Welcome to Tython, Padawan. Everyone at the temple is looking forward to meeting you.
Go to the planet Tython. There you will find the ancient ruins of a temple that has a strong connection to the Force.
What's up, MetaNerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of one of the most important planets in all of Star Wars, especially for the Jedi Order. There have been a lot of things from this world that have been slowly incorporated into the new canon, so I will include everything from Legends and Canon in chronological order and stressing the impact of key events. Just be sure to look out for the Canon tab on screen if you care about that distinction. But before we jump in, I want to tell you guys about our sponsor, the Star Wars Card Trader app by Topps. This is a free-to-play collectible card trading app that is always adding cool new cards, and now great stuff from the Mandalorian TV show. If you're watching a video like this, you have to be like me, a fan of all the little details in the lore that they're packing into every shot. And these cards act as a great way to focus on things that you might have missed in the action of the show. Beautiful close-ups that show you just how much work was put into every little thing on screen. But there are also these stylized cards, and my favorite, the behind-the-scenes stuff, with things like this amazing sketch-up of Boba's triumphant return. The way you unlock these cards is simple. Every day you will get multiple cargo drops and free credits. Cargo drops give either packs or credits, and then you use those to buy even more packs, which will have a bunch of different cards from all Star Wars eras in a ton of different styles. There are also daily activities. Lock On gives you the chance to grab all sorts of things, even crystals that allow you to unlock rarer packs. While missions act like a scavenger hunt, a bounty on certain rewards that is filled by collecting different cards, like sets of Darth Vader or the Child. To complete these, you can head over to the Trade tab, where you'll find a busier hub of activity than a Jawa swap meet, with new cards popping up every second, allowing you to get the cards you want the most. The app is a really great combination of card collecting nostalgia with the practicality of this global trade network. What I like to do is to head over to the wish list and check out all the amazing cards that are out there. You can search for specific topics like Mandalorian or characters like Boba Fett and see all the artwork from everything from behind the scenes stuff, close-ups of gear and weapons, to even old obscure comics that most have never seen before. There is endless stuff to enjoy about the Star Wars Card Trader app, and it just gets better every week with the new Mandalorian content dropping after each episode. So definitely check it out using the link in the description below, and follow MetaNerds in the app so that together we can rule the card trading universe. So let's head to grid coordinates L10 on the galactic map, within the deep core. Its sun was Tythos, and it had two moons, Ashla and Bogan. As Tython had an incredible natural connection to the Force, much like what we've seen with Dathomir and its connection with the dark side, Ilum's abundance of kyber crystals, or the living Force planet that was the font of the midichlorians. These three celestial bodies form something of a Force Trinity. It is often believed that Ashla represents the light and Bogan the dark, but that oversimplifies the earlier Force worshippers' understandings of these moons. Tython represented balance, and if one was seen to be focused too much on only the light side of the Force, they would be sent to Ashla, but not because they aligned with the light, but because from this moon they would look out and see only the ominous Bogan. The opposite is also true. Those delving too deeply into the dark would be forced to stare out on the shining light of Ashla. From one, you only saw the other. From Tython, the point of balance, you could more accurately perceive the Ashla and Bogan, the light and dark. This acted as a sort of naturally occurring metaphor. Exiling the practitioner to the moon of their dominant aspect showed them that from that perspective, they saw only the opposite, equal in size and influence, and just as timeless. And we see that over 20,000 years later, there were beings like the Bendu that still upheld this belief, believing that the Jedi and Sith had forgotten this original understanding.
Jedi and Sith wield the Ashlar and Bogan, the light and the dark. I'm the one in the middle, the Bendu.
And curiously enough, the Jedi Order that would emerge from these original Force practitioners on Tython still had this relic of this belief in their phrases, even if they didn't live by it.
Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness!
To these later Jedi, balance had kinda lost its meaning, and came to be understood as absolute aversion to the dark side, which rejected the whole symbolic significance of Tython, as the Force nexus that was the anchor point upon which the equally legitimate and necessary light and dark orbited. And even more evidence that the Jedi still knew of this celestial trinity was that when Ahsoka went into hiding after Order 66, she took the name Ashla. But these were concepts of the Jedi, who we will talk about in great detail in a second. But to get the full context, let's head back to somewhere around 100,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. Tens of thousands of years before the Old Republic was created, a still unknown species of giants constructed enormous ziggurats and pyramids all across this Force-soaked planet. These structures are all that remained of this original, presumably native population. But the Gree would arrive in 36,453 BBY. They found a lush world covered in mostly forests and jungles, but there were also some deserts and ice caps. Numerous continents all separated by large seas. The Gree were the first species to achieve interstellar travel, and by the time they set down on Tython, the natives were long gone. But there was an abundance of wildlife, with some abnormally high levels of aggression and ability. Things like screech lizards, acid spiders, hook hawks, blood spites, and flame taigas. The Gree would set up one of their hypergates in the bowels of these structures, but they would eventually abandon this planet as well. Why they did this is still unknown, but is presumed to be due to manipulations by the Force itself. Later we would see the Qua, who had a technology called Infinity Gates, which were very similar to Gree tech, and they too would set up these gates in the enormous ruins. The Force would leave its mark on this species, and the Qua would use their gates to travel across the galaxy, uplifting countless populations, introducing them to the existence of this all-binding energy field known as the Force, and preaching that one must find balance. So we see that long before the Jedi, this species also learned from Tython that balance in the light and dark aspects of the Force was key. But one of the species introduced to this belief decided to reject this teaching in favor of more power. The Rakata would come to draw exclusively on the dark side of the Force, and seek to destroy their superiors and put an end to their benevolent missionary work, replacing it with what was called the Infinite Empire. Using a new technology that channeled the Force itself into their hyperdrives, their empire literally ran on dark side power. To protect the galaxy, and especially Tython, the Qua destroyed their own Infinity Gates to stop the spread of Rakata. Those that were isolated on Tython eventually died out, but at least the Rakata did not make it to this Force nexus, at least for now. Circa 37,500 BBY, massive pyramidal ships called the Tho Yor departed from Tython, and traveled across the galaxy to various Force-worshipping people scattered across the stars. One of the most notable were the Order of Dai Bendu, monks that lived in the harsh, snow-covered world of Ando Prime. These ships had no apparent pilot or technology, and these monks would meditate on its mystery for over a millennia before it opened up one fateful day. Again, with no organic being or technology seeming to be behind it, through their minds, these Bendu monks felt commanded to enter the craft, feeling that the Force itself was conducting this strange series of events. Each of the pyramids then traveled to several other worlds to collect more Force-sensitive beings. The year 36,453 BBY could be considered the year that the galaxy would change forever, as it is the year that various Force-observing groups were delivered to Tython on the 8 Tho Yor ships. Numerous Force observers from dozens of different species were all thrust into the same mystery, having no idea what had just happened to them or why, but they all agreed that the Force itself had wanted them to all come together. Each of these 8 ships encircled a large central Tho Yor that floated above a stone monolith, but their arrival brought on an enormous Force storm, the skies consumed by dark clouds and powerful bolts of lightning, followed by earthquakes and tsunamis. Each contemplated the meaning behind this, thinking it may be showing them how much destruction could be wrought if their combined Force powers were ever to go astray, a warning of what would come if this community lost control. The 8 craft then shot out to different regions to release their passengers. It would take roughly 1,000 years for all of these Force observers to unify, and when they did, they agreed on a code, and decided to call themselves the Jedi Order. Jedi being a word that meant mystic center in the language of the Dai Bendu practitioners. They had set up 8 different temples around each of the Tho Yor, dedicated to different aspects of the Force, while that larger one located at the monolith they were first brought to was called the Temple of Balance. And it was this Jedi Order that set up the Ashla and Bogan meditation mentioned earlier. In 36,019 BBY, they would construct their first Jedi Temple, where they both studied the wisdom of their various Force traditions from these different groups and species, while also trying to understand the mystery of this planet. As Jedi Master Dila John Marola put it, quote, "Never forget that we were brought here. Tython is a planet rich in the Force, but it is also a place of mystery, unknown to us, existing here for eons before the Tho Yor arrived. Its age is deep, its stories deeper." They would also discover that the physical characteristics of this planet would change due to perturbations in the Force. Force storms were still breaking out on occasion, something they realized was due to shifts in the balance of the Force in the galaxy. And Padawans would have to travel to each of the continents across a 2-year journey to all 9 temples. Over the millennia, these Force wielders would reproduce and create a large society and ports for trade. But it quickly became clear that outsiders that were not Force sensitive would start to go mad, eventually leading to biological failures as well. And the Jedi realized that this was true of their own offspring as well. Though Force sensitivity does have strong heritability, there was an ever-growing number of children that did not have this connection, and thus needed to be moved off of Tython. And when the major city of Aurum was destroyed by a Force storm, this sparked what was called the Second Migration, a complete removal of all non-Force sensitives from this Nexus world. Their solar system contained 8 other worlds, and each would be populated by these Tythons. And then as those worlds became more populated, more Force sensitives would pop up there. And when this happened, these children would be brought to Tython, which was a reunion with some long-lost relatives. As still at this point, this solar system didn't have a lot of outsiders from the galaxy at large. Almost 100% of the populations of this solar system were still the descendants of those original beings brought in from the Tho Yors. But as these other 8 worlds would grow in strength and power, there came to be a resentment for those on Tython, those weird mystics that occasionally stole your kids and forbid others from visiting. A female Twi'lek named Hydia would rise to unite crime syndicates on these worlds, and eventually unify a great force under the title of the Despot Queen. She would launch an invasion of Tython, saying to her followers, quote, "The Jedi say, there is no ignorance, there is knowledge. But they are ignorant of your lives, your struggles, and their superiority blinds them. They say, there is no fear, there is power. Yet in their power they are smug, and I will make them fear me." This was in 25,805 BBY, and her war would lead to the deaths of millions of her troops, along with thousands of Jedi, marking the first time that these Force-observing monks would step into a military role, in defense of the world that represented the Force's place of balance in our physical universe. But things were about to get even worse. Just 12 years later, the Rakata would finally find Tython, after 10,000 years of searching for the Qua's most sacred Force Nexus world. At this time, the Infinite Empire was becoming degenerate. The constant tapping into the dark side was corrupting the Rakata, killing them off as the Force struck back. Much like it would during the era of the Sith Darth Plagueis, who posed such a threat to the Force itself, such a potential for mastery over midichlorians, that the Force spawned the Chosen One into existence to destroy the Sith. Similarly, the Rakata were seeing that the Force itself was their enemy, and thought that by conquering Tython, by accessing the old Infinity Gate at the core of its central temple, perhaps they could conquer the Force, control the legendary Nexus. The first round of attacks would see their Flesh Raider troops thrown against the Jedi, and they would be pushed off-world at first, only to regroup and strike back at Tython. The settled worlds had put aside their differences and joined forces with their old Jedi enemies, and lay in ambush on the moon Ashla, but the invaders detected them, leveling entire cities and the destruction of their allied fleet. The fight would come to the surface of Tython, and this conflict would result in the creation of the lightsaber. The Rakatan forces used a device called a Force Saber, which channeled dark side energy through an artificial crystal. The Jedi found a way to produce a similar weapon by drawing light side energy through a naturally occurring crystal. This conflict would also show us that at least one Jedi, Tasha Rio, did come to fully understand the role of the Tho Yor, by becoming one with the Force inside of one of these pyramidal craft. After stepping into the blue energy, she says, quote, "I am one with the Force again, one with Tython, one with the Tho Yor. I understand who created it, and why." With this, the Tho Yor activate and emit beams of orange destructive energy, which seek out the Darksiders commanding the Rakata fleets, completely destroying these impressive ships and allowing the Jedi to finally be rid of the Rakatan plague and continue their stewardship over Tython. But this shook the Jedi Order, placed the first seeds of the rise of the Sith. Though the Sith title itself was still a ways away, there were many who were traumatized by these wars and thought that they should look more towards the power of the dark, the Bogan, while others thought they needed to go even further towards the light, the Ashla. This tension within the Order would quickly erupt in a civil war, a conflict called the Force Wars. These people were split, and those who felt the Ashla was the true path decided to call themselves the Jedi, and established a High Council and warrior knights. But one of their High Council members was being drawn to the dark, backing the Bogan minority, and setting up a military presence in the Tho Yor Temple of Knowledge. Not a Sith in name yet, but this dynamic would plague the galaxy from here on out, originating from Tython's Force Nexus being knocked out of balance.
My colleagues wouldn't listen. I spoke of strength, they cowered. I spoke of a golden age, they chattered of overstepping ourselves.
Took many powerful Jedi to stop you, Master Rajavari. Those who survived were clearly worthy to survive any challenge.
Remember that battle, my friends, my death.
These Darksiders were defeated and pushed off-world, but these force storms, earthquakes, and tsunamis were growing in proportion to their straying off balance. Most Jedi believed that their force powers came from Tython itself, but when some knights ventured out to liberate other worlds in the system, they were shocked to see that they still had their powers and deep connection to the all-binding energy, if not as intense as back home. Though victorious, the fact that these reverberations in the Force were physically altering the planet pushed the High Council to move its home to Ossus, going from the deep core all the way to the fringes of the Outer Rim. About 1,000 years later, these Jedi would face another civil war, known as the First Great Schism, which resulted in the Juntapal taking the title of the first Dark Lord of the Sith. The Sith Order would eventually bring about the destruction of Ossus as well, driving the Order to the core world of Coruscant. They still had records of Tython, though none dared visit that volatile world. None who followed the Ashla, that is, as the Sith would travel back to their shared homeworld, and would use this nexus point to power their alchemical experiments. One of the most terrifying beasts produced were the Terentatex, who came to swarm all over the continents of Tython, and then numerous other worlds as the Sith spread these evil spawns. The Jedi High Council initiated the Great Hunt, and Jedi would set foot back on the original homeworld of their order after 20,000 years, finding a world torn apart by the rift between the Jedi and the Sith, but they were able to exterminate the Terentatex. Though shortly after this triumph, natural, or perhaps force-guided shifts in the galaxy resulted in the collapse of hyperlanes that led to Tython, leaving it abandoned again for nearly 400 years. It wasn't until the great Jedi Knight Satele Shan decided that it was her duty to reclaim the ancient homeworld. Following the sacking of Coruscant and the tentative peace of the Cold War between the Republic and Sith Empire, Shan set up new Jedi temples on Tython, which at this time had gone back to looking like a lush, beautiful world. She would set up the headquarters near the site of the original Darksider stronghold at the Temple of Knowledge. It wasn't long before the Sith Empire wanted to show the Jedi that they would not take their shared homeworld with ease.
You've been invited here to perform an act once thought impossible. An attack on the Jedi Temple of Tython.
Launching a series of attacks that were repelled by one mysterious figure that would be named as the Hero of Tython by Satele Shan. But by 3638 BBY, Darth Arcus would finally take the Jedi Temple. Though interestingly, he was not a Sith, but a Revanite, a follower of Revan, a man who was considered to be one that had achieved the deepest connections to the light side and the dark side over the course of his difficult life. Revanites wanted to live by his wisdom, something that was more in line with the original Jedi, more in line with what seemed to be the will of Tython, fully seeing and understanding the light and dark. Arcus used his power in the Sith Empire to take this world simply to recover relics and holocrons that would let him better understand Revan, and the nature of the mysterious and ancient Rakatan Forerunners. This was followed up by the conquest of the Eternal Empire, a force of droids that were led by the spirit of Darth Vitiate. Though he was one of, if not the most powerful Sith of all time, it is unknown if he took any interest in Tython. At this point, he was inhabiting his host body Valkorion, having managed to transfer his essence and stay alive for over 1,500 years. Perhaps he did not want to tempt the Force with his presence on this world. The Jedi communities were spread throughout the galaxy, and would eventually reorganize on Coruscant around 3630 BBY. It would be 2,000 years before Force users returned, and this time it was in the form of a Sith. During the New Sith Wars, Lord Belia Darzu would establish a fortress on this nexus, and use its energy to power her skill of Meku Daru, the alchemical ability to turn flesh into metal, beast into machine, taking up various strange creatures of this world and raising an army of techno-beasts, launching the Sictus Wars against Republic-held worlds. She recorded this technique in a holocron for future Sith, and by the year 990 BBY, this would be discovered by Darth Bane. As he approached the fortress, her automated defenses sprang to life after lying dormant for more than 2 centuries, though he was able to destroy them and work his way into the structure, finding that at this point in its history, all this conflict and presence of powerful Darksiders was triggering that reflexive nature of Tython to lash out. The surface looked like a hellscape, with constant powerful storms. A lost paradise from the time of the Jedi Order. He would enter the fortress and be ambushed by the remaining techno-beasts, and after destroying them, he discovers Darzu's holocron and meditated on it to learn how to build his own. But his apprentice Darth Zana was being pursued by Jedi, and she leads them to Tython. Here, light and dark would fight on this world again, and these two Sith would be victorious over their 5 Jedi attackers, ensuring that the existence of the Sith Order remained a secret. Though over the next decades, the High Council decided to erect one final temple on Tython, using it as a place for only the most disciplined of Jedi, braving the immense dark side presence and focusing on the light that was left on this corrupted Force Nexus. Over the next millennium, Tython again faded into obscurity. If the High Council knew of its existence, they never spoke of it openly, though deep in the Jedi archives there were still records of its tumultuous past. Though the exact details on the origins of their own order did become obscured with time, some would place the first temple on Tython, while other Jedi researchers believed it was on Ahch-To. The confusion is understandable, and perhaps the temple Luke discovered could be a Bendu temple, the precursor to the Jedi Order. Or it could be the first place a temple was built after they had officially become Jedi, not Jedi. As this Ahch-To temple was first built tens of thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin, putting it in the range of the legends of Tython. We're also told that the Jedi of the Clone Wars era gave Tython an almost mystical aura, saying that if one could make the journey and brave the Force storms, they could discover fantastical hordes of holocrons and data cards, containing all sorts of ancient wisdom. Though for all we know, none of the Jedi of this era dared to go here. But Darth Vader and his accomplice Dr. Aphra would dare to set down on this cursed world. In 3 ABY, she would lead the Sith to this legendary planet, arriving at an ice cap. The site was called the Martyrium of Frozen Tears, a structure that was made to house the relics owned by noble Jedi who gave up their lives for the Force. Aphra tries to betray Vader, leading him into a place that her archaeologist father had suspected was an ancient Jedi confessional. It was built of solid kyberite, a material that channeled the Force, and was within a Force-active mountain, on a planet that was a Force nexus. So after leading Vader into it, she sees that he is ambushed by visions, and she explains that with millennia of people explaining their guilt, their sins in this Force Nexus chamber, she suspected that it would cause psychological havoc in the mind of someone who was full of regrets. Aphra would be able to escape just seconds before Vader overcame his psyche and exploded this ancient chamber of solid kyber with his pure darkside energy. By 9 ABY, we see that Ahsoka Tano was well aware of the significance this planet had in the Force, likely spending a good amount of time exploring this nexus point, just like she explored the dark side world of Malachor. And when Din Djarin arrives, we see that Tython was again becoming a lush world, always reacting to the state of the Force in the galaxy. Hopefully this is a sign that the light was rising, with the ancient Jedi sites, older than the Republic itself, still in working order, still acting as a physical connection to the energy that binds all living things together, uniting all Jedi across space and time. So that's it for the complete breakdown of Tython in canon and legends. But you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Tython is set up like a metaphor in a ton of ways other than just the moons. Things like the Flesh Raiders and tons of violent native species, and areas like the Gnarls that were so densely covered in brush that it took months for the Jedi to clear, are all there so we can infer something about the Force, that it wants us to be strong and diligent. It wants you to come here to meditate on the glory of the Force, but that doesn't mean you should be weak. You will be attacked and killed off by the wildlife if you are not strong, and if you do not work to preserve your achievements, they will quickly be swallowed up by vegetation. The Jedi of around 4000 BBY found enormous compounds and series of bridges and roads that took months to reveal, a warning that this too would become their fate if they did not find a way to preserve their achievements. As if the one thing the Force wanted you to be afraid of was your physical weakness, which would allow evil to dominate, and entropy, of order going to disorder. There are a ton of things that have come back into canon, most recently with the Mandalorian show, but also there's a ton of similarities with Palpatine's hideout on Exegol. The first thing I thought when seeing this was it might be a Tho Yor. Of course there's a ton that's still different, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the intention. Tython was first introduced in 2007 in the novel Darth Bane Rule of Two. The Bane trilogy is one of, if not the best Star Wars books ever written. I go back and forth between them and Darth Plagueis being the best, but in that book we learn that the Jedi Order started here, which was also confirmed by the Old Republic game in 2011. Though Luke is now saying in canon that Ahch-To was first. In universe, even in canon, there is debate over where the true original site is. And I hope you see that even in Legends, you could see one debating over whether or not the Dai Bendu's original temples, the Jedi's temples, or the Jedi's temples should be considered the very first one of this order. So it's cool that there's both in-universe and out-of-universe debate on this. And we get the most details from the Dawn of the Jedi comic series. But if you want to explore more of the Old Republic era Jedi philosophies, the debate around balance and the will of the Force itself, I really suggest the video Philosophy of Kreia here on YouTube. Besides being one of the most interesting characters ever, not just in Star Wars, the video is incredibly well made. You get to hear the character struggle in her own words, and I agree with this video's creator that Lucas's point within the movies, coming from Lucas's love of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and mythology in general, is that one cannot start down the path of deciding when it's okay to do an evil act and when it isn't. Also that we do seem to be tested by something, and so you should completely abstain from rationalizing with evil. You will go down a path where you become evil, and that most evil people in history could conceptualize why the ends justify the means. That is what a Sith does, and Kreia struggles with this, and really with her hatred that the Force puts us in these situations. We make fun of the Jedi for saying balance, while losing their minds if someone gets mildly upset, or Force forbid just wants to shoot some lightning. But I think I'm with the Jedi Order on this one, not the Jedi or Bendu, at least in theory. But it definitely is a great debate, and at the core of Star Wars. If you want to show your support, please hit the like button and comment down below. That's all great for the YouTube algorithm. And be sure to subscribe so you can see future videos like this. You can also check out the links in the description, where you can find cool Star Wars metal print art, and even free Audible audiobooks. There you can also find our Patreon and PayPal. Special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, especially our $25 tier, Chris Garcia, Cass Costello, C7Go, and Matthew Batrami. But most important of all, remember, always check and see if the Force is in balance before heading to the surface of Tython, and the Force will be with you always.